making the decisions with fact-based information or without very much college knowledge, they do then rely on feelings. So I want to be clear that an informed decision actually involves both facts and feelings, right? But for a lot of students and families going through the process, the amount of information is overwhelming. So then they just fall back on the feelings and rely on the feelings. Like, I don't know how many people I've heard, well-intentioned, say things like, "Oh, when you get to the college, you're going to know the right one. You're going to feel it when you're there," right? Which is well-intentioned, but misguided in my opinion, because we can do better than that.
Hey folks, welcome to the MIFA podcast. My name is Jonathan Hughes, and you just heard from one of our guests on the show today, Dr. Tim Poynton. And if he sounds familiar to you, it may be because he and our other guest on the show today, Dr. Amanda Sterk, were featured on a previous episode of the MIFA podcast. They represent their organization, College Unmazed. And on our previous show, you heard snippets of a webinar that they did on the 6 keys to finding a good college fit. Well, today we're going to talk about some related topics with them, ones that they address through their College Unmazed curriculum, like having good facts in the college search and how to integrate that with emotions for students and parents, and how we can measure students' grasp of college knowledge, how we can sort of close gaps between groups of students as to who has that knowledge and who needs it. As well as, finally, what it's like to do this whole college search and admissions process, not just as academics studying it, but as parents. So it was a great conversation, and we'll post links to the resources in the show notes that they bring up. And if you have a child in high school, or if you are a high school student thinking about college, or even if you're a counselor, I think you'll get a lot out of it. So check it out. I'll be back later on with the wrap-up, but for now, let's get to know our guests from College Unmazed.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much. And so my name is Dr. Amanda Sterk, and I am the Director of College and Career Advising at Method Learning, which is a big national test prep college advising program here. And I used to work in K-12 as a teacher and school counselor. And then I worked in higher education, running a very large dual enrollment program down here in Southwest Florida. And so, really excited to be here and just to kind of share everything we've been doing.
And Tim, how about yourself?
Hi, Tim Poynton. I am a associate professor at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. In the Department of Counseling and School Psychology, my focus is on teaching the college counseling and the career counseling courses to future school counselors. I also worked as a school counselor in New York State, worked as a college advisor for a little while, academic advising, I should say, just to specify that, for a minute anyway, at the State University of New York at Albany, and then transitioned into teaching about school counseling instead of practicing it.
Sort of what brought you together, essentially, and to College Unmazed?
Yeah. So I guess as part of being a professor at most universities, but at the University of Massachusetts Boston in particular, is doing research. So it's a big part of my job. It's a big part of what I like about the job. So probably about 10, 12 years ago, I started working with my colleague, Rich Lepan, who's out at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and we started doing research to try and understand how school counselors support the transition from high school to college, in particular. So we started doing some research on that. I'll try to give you the short version. Long story short, one of the things that I ended up developing was what's called the College Admissions Knowledge Evaluation. One of the things that we learned from our research was that it seemed like students and families were making decisions about where to go to college with relatively little fact-based information or relatively little knowledge. And it seems like people in K-12 education, high schools, and high school counselors in particular are well positioned to improve that for students. So the first thing to do was to figure out how much college knowledge, as we like to call it, and other people call it that as well, but how much college knowledge people actually have. And I learned after looking into it, I was surprised to find that nobody had developed a way to measure college knowledge. So that was I developed a measure of college knowledge called the CAKE, the College Admissions Knowledge Evaluation, um, and put that out there, and it was pretty well received. Part of me thinks it's relatively simple and straightforward, but again, to give you the short version, the research showed that basically most students and families are scoring about a 50 on that. So graduating high school students who had already received all the college knowledge they're going to get in high school scored about a 50 on that assessment.
Out of 100.
50 out of 100, yeah, out of 100. So that's a failing grade everywhere I've ever been. So Rich and I started thinking about how we could address that, and we were working on a book, and that's when, fortuitously, Amanda, who we didn't know, reached out.
Yeah. So again, sort of, I had being in a school counselor role, I was in a big role and realized, similar to sort of Rich and Tim, it came at it from a different conclusion, kind of boots on the ground, that parents were really just coming in as, me being the college counselor, they just had so many questions and so much information. And I was one person to about 425 students running this program and trying just to manage students and parents and get them the right information. So I started sort of personally for my own students writing and blogging. And I realized it was a curriculum. And so I put it together for my Florida high school students and realized it was other families should have this book. And so I was having some success. I published it and it was having success. And people kept saying, what about the national version? I want a book for, Massachusetts, and I want a book for Georgia. And so, but I knew that if we were to go to schools or trio programs and things like that, we needed the research behind the thinking, right? I knew why I was doing it. And I had a master's in counseling at the time, and I was working on my doctorate in educational leadership. And so I actually happened to run across the cake and reached out to Tim and Rich and said, hey, I want to know more about this. I kind of want to use it. And they said, well, we're writing a book. And I said, well, I'm writing a book. And so we combined forces. And then that's where we got College Unmazed and really just kind of reworked it from the ground up and really thinking about the student path all the way from ninth to 12th grade. And then where do we embed that college knowledge? So if we know we want to get them to 100, not all the information needs to happen in ninth grade, but it can't all happen in 12th grade either. So we were really systematic to scaffold the curriculum so it's the right time, the right information that can lead families through that process in a more informed way. So I think we launched the book about 2 years ago now and have had some great success and have some partners and we've expanded all the way into a school-based curriculum or a program-based curriculum where people can teach it. We have a parent guide, we have a book on dual enrollment, we have a book on homeschool coming. So we've really kind of looked at all different sectors to figure out how different groups can be informed along the way. So really exciting stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, I was going over the website, but I mentioned that we had highlighted a presentation that you did for us in an earlier episode of the podcast. And people should go ahead and listen to that. I think it's episode 75 or 76 or something. But it's the 6 keys to college, or finding the right college fit, right? And so, I kind of thought that was not it, but a large part of what you did. But then looking through everything that you did, I was really sort of um, overwhelmed by everything that you are able to put out. So I want to go back a little bit to the cake, as you call it. College, what is it? College.
The College Admissions Knowledge Evaluation.
Did you find that there were certain things that most people knew and certain things that most people didn't know? The average score was 50, but did they line up with what they knew and what they didn't know?
Yes, generally speaking, I don't have the details, but generally speaking, people were more. So there was kind of two subscales on the measure. One's knowledge of college life, and the other one was admissions procedures and financial aid. And people were generally a little bit better on the knowledge of college life questions, like which is questions like what's a syllabus, for example, and less I guess overall less accurate in some of the specifics around the admissions procedures and financial aid. One of the big ones that was surprising to me, maybe I'm not sure why, but a lot of people didn't know that like May 1st is National College Decision Day. But there were some questions that they knew more of and some questions they knew less of. So just to be clear on this, the article I wrote in the Professional School Counseling Journal, um, there were 76 items originally. We whittled that down to 75. 42 of the 76 items were psychometrically valid. So that's what the research study kind of showed. So, and so of those 42 items, kind of getting to your point, there were 42 items that weren't too easy or too hard, essentially. Um, I still recommend for people really to use the full 75 items if they're going to use it, just because the fact that statistically or psychometrically an item doesn't perform well if too few people get it wrong, but like in terms of college knowledge, like those are the ones we want to focus the most on, even though they're not statistically supported. Um, so yeah, there were many more questions that far too few people knew as opposed to ones that were too easy. We didn't have There was only a small handful of items that most people actually knew.
One of the things we're trying to do with like a college unmazed or with our type of curriculum is to decrease the gaps of college knowledge, right? Is we want students to have that college knowledge because those are the barriers that they're going to come up against when they're looking at a 2-year 4-year institutions, right? Is they need to know what a syllabus is and about the FAFSA and these deadlines and things like that. But in their research, they actually found the gap, and you can be a little clearer on this, Tim. The gap of knowledge actually increases between low income minority students and families that had college going parents. So, as school counselors, we assume that we're closing the gap. And in your research, it kind of shows that the gap does increase from ninth grade to 12th grade. It gets wider for those two groups of students. So that's one of the things when we really were trying to build College Unmazed is how can we close that gap for all students? And again, why that scaffolded approach is really important.
Tell me about how you go about trying to close these gaps and promote that knowledge. What are the different ways in which you do that?
Yeah, I think it's trying to provide school counselors and students and families themselves directly, but our focus really is on supporting school counselors and people who work with students in schools, not just school counselors, but the many fine TRIO programs, for example, the Upward Bounds, the Gear Ups, and things like that. Trying to provide both curriculum and the book, a student focused workbook, to provide a scope and sequence, as Amanda was talking about with the scaffolding, a scope and sequence for addressing the college knowledge issues that we know exist. And just to go back for 1 second to what Amanda was mentioning, like so, the second part of the study also published in the Professional School Counseling Journal a couple of years later, we did find that the knowledge gap does increase over time. The difference in knowledge between first generation and continuing generation students increases over time. And that's a real big problem because schools are supposed to be a place for equity, and it's not happening in the realm of college knowledge. Like that's a problem. That's a serious problem. So in College Unmazed, to bring it back to your question, what we're trying to do is make the resources available to everybody, with a long term goal being of closing that gap, so that students, first generation students, those who are the first in their families to go to college, aren't disadvantaged, because that's what it amounts to. The knowledge gap leads to a disadvantage in the college search and application process.
One of the things that I really liked about your presentation that we highlighted was that you had not just identified all the factors that you need to know about when you're compiling your college list, etc., but what steps you might need to implement those things. So it might not be helpful, for example, to look at cost right at the very beginning, right? Or to have that determined. So can you tell me a little bit about that? What should students be thinking about their freshman year versus their sophomore year, junior year, senior year, etc.?
Yeah, and I'll take this one. So we have really two sections of the book, because we really believe that it sort of comes in. One is the actual process of applying and thinking about your college list, which is really your junior, senior year. And then your freshman, sophomore is really building those critical skills that you need to be college and career ready, right? So we talk about them as the eight strengths of college and career readiness. The things about agency and being able to manage your time and having that college knowledge. One of the big things we talk a lot about is building a college support network around you. So, really, the first half of the workbook, we really dive into, what we call building your you factor, what's unique about you, your passions, your interests. We talk about academically, like how do you build your academic factor in terms of your classes, your even career options, things like that within your school setting or even outside of your school if you're going to maybe take a class over the summer or do community college, and what does that sort of look like as a plan. We also then focus on your career factor because a lot of students don't know, and they don't know how to sort of navigate their interests and their values and their abilities, and so we want them to have that conversation. And then fourth, we really want them to start talking about money and scholarships because too many times I think schools leave that until the very end. And one of the things that we try to preface with it all is that college can be very affordable. And we want that to come out is that there are a lot of options, whether it's a 2+2 system or staying locally or going to schools that provide full financial aid, really looking at those options. And so we really want them to sort of build who they are and be cognizant of sort of that steps. But then we let them know why they're building those steps. Like this is what college is looking for. This is what career and employers are looking for. And this is how you can build those. So when you go to apply to college, you're going to be a more, kind of well-rounded type of student and need. And then in the second half, we call it leads, is we actually then work them through the process of narrowing down schools. What does that look like? Applying for schools and things like that. Do you want to add anything to that, Tim?
The only thing I'll just add on the career factor is lots of people don't know what they're doing, what they want to do when they're in high school, and they don't know that when they're in college and when they're in their 20s or their 30s or their 40s even, right? Like career development is it's a lifelong skill. So we do try to give the Cliff Notes version, if you will, on that. But what we focus on in the book is less on what major are you interested in and more on what career pathway are you interested in. Like the distinction between being a biomedical engineer and um, a a chemical engineer, for example, or a software engineer. Like engineering is all lumped into one career pathway, and so we try to encourage people to think more about the pathways and less about the specific majors because that just keeps more doors open than closed. One of the reasons why we have people focus on the career pathways is because um, while most people might not be able to name a specific major, they can think of like, oh, I like working with people, or I don't like working with people, or I like working with numbers and spreadsheets, or I don't. Like people can they can narrow down instead of saying I have absolutely no idea what I want to do. Like people can be very oftentimes much a good bit more specific than that to at least narrow it down to a group of career pathways, for example.
You mentioned earlier on that there were too few students with access to fact-based um, research when it comes to college. So that, of course, made me think of the thing that if you don't have facts, the thing that you fill that with is feelings, right? So can you talk a little bit about that and the some of the things that you've seen in your capacity, both of you, the feelings that can contribute to maybe somebody making not such a great decision when if it's not based on facts and what you might want to avoid.
Um, yes, that's one of the other things. A lot when people aren't making the decisions with um, fact-based information or without very much college knowledge, they do then rely on feelings. So I want to be clear that an informed decision actually involves both facts and feelings, right? But for a lot of students and families going through the process, the amount of information is overwhelming. So then they just fall back on the feelings and rely on the feelings. Like I don't know how many people I've heard, well-intentioned, say things like, "Oh, when you get to the college, you're going to know the right one you're going to feel it when you're there, right? Which is well intentioned, but misguided in my opinion, because we can do better than that. Like, we can look at some of the facts to back up those feelings, essentially, or question some of those feelings. So I would never say a student should disregard a college based purely on facts. It should raise questions. And likewise, I would never say a student should disregard a college completely based on feelings. Like, it needs to be both. So a decision to be an informed decision, it needs to involve both the facts and the feelings. And that's really what we focus on in the book, going through what we call the lead strategy, which is making a list, exploring the colleges on that list, applying to the colleges from that initial list that you had, deciding which college to attend from those you've been accepted to, and then developing a success plan. Like, that's what we embed in the lead strategy as a way to really pay attention to both the facts and the feelings. Like, in the beginning of that process, at the list process, we're paying more attention to the facts. And in the explore phase, we're paying more attention to the facts. And then in the apply and decide phase, where we really begin to bring in some of the feelings so that they can be considered.
And I'll add to that, because I think one, it's hard, and both Tim and I have recently been going through this process of our own children going through the college process, and figuring out when their feelings coming into play versus the facts coming into play, right? And so we're going to have that as parents, but I do think it's important. Like, parents are, right now, because of the marketing of a lot of schools, it becomes a lot of feelings, right? Because they want to have that feel and that big school feel. And, like, I swear, with a lot of the kids I was working with this year, everybody wanted to apply to UT Austin. Like, Northeastern said the other day they had 98,000 applications. So these feelings are getting these huge amount of applications. And when you ask a student, why did you apply to Northeastern? Great university, but what was your reasoning behind it, right? Or UT Austin or UF or wherever that may be. And so, one of the things that I think is important that we do is Tim has come up with this really great tool called the College Data Organizer. It's completely free. It's this amazing Excel sheet. I use it daily within the students I work with. And it provides those facts in a way that sort of connects with what are some of the important things that you need to be paying attention to. So you're kind of getting through the marketing piece of it. So, for example, student outcomes. How many students are actually graduating on time from this college, or how many are coming in with or coming out with the degree that I'm interested in, and what does that mean for me? Or what is the average debt that people are coming out with? What's the average amount of financial aid coming in? All these things. And so, if you just focus on the dining hall or what the dorm looks like, and not on the outcome. For example, I worked at a community college for many years, and we had one of the best nursing programs, and it had the highest placement rate of any of our universities, even our 4-year universities within the area. So, if I was talking to a student who really wanted to be a nurse, it's like, well, actually, your local community college has a better outcome if that's the program that you're looking for. If you go to our other state university, it's going to cost twice as much, and actually they don't have as strong of a program, and you could be at a disadvantage. So, but if you want a 4-year university versus, and those are the things that we have to pay attention to, but we have to be more focused in on getting that data, figuring out how that's applicable to us as a family, and then embedding in that sort of emotional decision.
Yeah, in a word, I mean, it's prestige. It's prestige, like what Amanda described as a great example of prestige, like significantly influencing the decision. Like, all the facts say this community college is better, but the student doesn't see themselves as identifying as a community college student, right? They want to say, I'm going to this college because it's more prestigious and I get to wear that as a badge of honor, so to speak. And we do this in lots of other parts of our lives, right? With the kind of house we buy, and like, my brother has a saying, like, thinking about cars, he always buys the cheapest car he can because he's like, what? It has 4 wheels and it goes forwards and backwards. So what do I care, right? And then there's other people for whom it's a status symbol in some ways, if we can say that, and if we can admit that. And I guess if people can admit that to themselves, prestige is often highly related to selectivity, which I think gets a little bit into the human nature of wanting the thing that's the hardest to have, or the thing we can't have. Like, everybody wants to go to Harvard. Harvard is one of the hardest places in the world to gain admission to. and it's perceived to be somehow better as a result of that. But one of the points that we try to make in the book with things like the college data organizer, as Amanda was just eloquently saying, um, what's good for you isn't necessarily what's good in terms of how hard it is to get into. Like those two things are not 100% related to each other. There are state colleges and universities that have really good outcomes. There was just an article that came out not that long ago about the public Ivies, right? And University of Florida was one of the ones on the list. What they looked at was student outcomes. They also had selectivity as part of that, like they had to admit no more than 25% of applicants or something like that. Um, but what makes a college good for any particular student um, involves more than just how hard it is to get into. But it doesn't have the name recognition, for example, and that's part of it. So,
Well, your answer sort of runs against something I was thinking of when you were earlier in the conversation, and that is how you interact with parents, right? And you mentioned, and I'm curious to know your experience as parents in this process as well. So, first of all, how do you interact with parents? What do you see from parents versus students in the answers that in the topic of the answer that you just gave? The prestige and the emotions and things like that. And then also, whether it's that or whether it's just the actual process itself, did anything jump out at you going through the process as parents versus in your professional role?
I'll go first, and just disclosure, my daughter's a junior, and so and I have a freshman daughter, and one wants nursing, and so again, when she gets a degree, it doesn't matter where she goes to school. That degree, that nursing degree, is going to get her any job that she is really looking for. They're looking at your communication skills and did you pass the test, and did you do well. It's not about a specific name, where my other daughter is looking at graduate school. She's looking at a PhD program. And so we're trying to, as parents, sort of tease out what is best for both of them because they're on different paths and being very communicative throughout that process. And part of what I love about both are the first part of the book, the four factors that we talk about, and the lead strategy is we are having those conversations about as family, how much are we going to be able to pay and what does that look like, and we're going to be looking at merit aid, and looking at a school that doesn't give any merit aid and is only financial aid might not be the best use of our choices. And so part of it is informing the student along the way, whether they're in middle school, freshman, junior, senior, and really kind of having them explain why they like a college. So instead of just saying, oh, I love this college, is beautiful, I want them to say, it looks like the library really has these amazing resources. It has a writing center that I could use. If I need accommodations, that's a big one that I always focus on with families. If your student needs 504 or IEP, what are those services once you get to college? And I would much rather my daughter, just as an example, say, you know what? I need a small group setting for my math class instead of being with 300 students, and really having that conversation, that does that school meet that need or not, to make them or allow them to be successful, right? And I just don't think enough parents are digging in deep and saying, what type of student is my student and what type of environment is actually going to allow them to flourish, and finding something that sort of makes that match, right? So part of, for me, it's just that communication piece, right? And you narrow down until you get your list, and then hopefully the list is broad enough that no matter what's on your list is a really good choice. Like, we don't want to just, I think too many kids are just throwing stuff on and being like, maybe, maybe it's, let's see. I want it to be a real thoughtful choice. So no matter what comes out to my daughters being accepted, every single one is a good choice, and then we can narrow down, and then that's kind of when we bring in that emotional feeling a little bit, right? Okay, now that we know we're accepted and we look at the financial aid package, now where do those feelings come into place? But sometimes those feelings are misguided or misplaced too early in the process, and they get blinded by everything else is telling them this isn't maybe the best school for you. Tim, do you want to add to that? I know you just finished the process.
Yeah, no, my daughter's a graduating senior, so going to be attending college next year, and I don't want to name names, so but my daughter's process was interesting in that I think to get to your point in terms of having people own their reasons for making the decisions that they make. Um, this was one of the struggles that we had. So we, of course, we put together a list, and she was accepted to a good range of schools. That she narrowed it down to, she ended up liking the tech school vibe essentially, and statistically speaking, she applied to some publics, some privates, and got into the majority of them. So when we were making the decisions, she was between two tech schools essentially, and one was 40% more than the other. So at the start of this process, we set a budget, like right at the start of the process, is that here's the amount of money that we as a family can afford. Like if you can keep it your decision to less than this, like you can graduate debt free. If it's more than this, then you're going to have to shoulder the student loans. I wasn't responsible. It would end up being about $17,000 a year in student loans. She liked the one tech school better than the other. Of course, she liked the more expensive one um, better. They're very similar in a lot of ways. They're different in some other ways. But I was trying to get her to explain her reasoning, and she couldn't do it. Like she was having trouble, like basically owning it, which, as you can, that was really hard for me. So my solution to that was to just provide as many learning opportunities as possible to try and help her learn more about both places. So we went to the admitted student days. We did more research online, and what ended up tipping it for, there was an admitted student reception that was after the admitted student day that we did on campus, and it was like a 2.5 hour drive. But we decided to go to this admitted student reception anyway, and they showed a video where it finally clicked for her. And it came down to socialization, essentially. She would have felt more comfortable socially in the tech school that had a slightly higher female to male gender ratio than the other one that had a lower gender ratio. But the one with the lower gender ratio, unsurprisingly, was cheaper, right? Um, so, um, so we, but they showed a video of how they helped the students make friends and get acquainted with their classmates, and the team building activities they do. And that was what did it for them. We didn't learn about that anywhere else. We learned about it in that one place. So that was what tipped the scales in her favor and made her say, like, so the first thing she said, I think this is what I liked. And then the second thing she said was, now I can graduate debt free. But it was a struggle there for a little while, for me as a parent, because who wants to see their kid lining up to graduate with $70,000+ in debt, like making this decision? That's really hard. I wasn't going to say, I was struggling to say no, but I was really close to it, to say I can't let you do that to yourself. um, and I'm glad I didn't have to at the end of it. But it was hard there for a while. So it can happen to anybody. I think it happens more frequently than perhaps we even know about. And maybe people just, um, not to throw my wife under the bus, but she was fine with it. She was like, "Oh, if she likes it better, that's where she should go." And I'm like, "No, we can do a little bit better than that. Like we need to do a little bit better than that, for that amount of money." Yeah.
Well, that's such a great point too, to own your decision, right? To know why you want to attend a particular college, and whatever that decision is, just to know why you're doing it is so valuable, and I appreciate that. I want to talk about so many more things, but we maybe you'll come back and talk about homeschooling and talk about dual enrollment, as I know that those are areas of focus for you that I'm actually really interested in. Um, but is there anything else before we go that you want to leave people with who are hearing this, and whether or not they are students or have a student, and they want to know more, or either about College Unmazed, about what you do, or just some general advice? Anything you want to say before we go?
Yeah, I'll go. I'll just say, really, College Unmazed really came from both the research side of the house, us working with literally thousands of students, and really putting it into practice. Every day we put into practice, and we see what families are needing and missing. And what I like about it, it's nice, it's simple, it's broken down, and it really gives parents the tools to help the student all the way through the process. And so, obviously, definitely check out our materials. It's a nice way that just you feel empowered, even talking to your school counselor. Doesn't replace the school counselor, but it allows for a more fruitful conversation between parents and students in the school and that college support network. So, obviously we'd love for you to check it out and check out that college data organizer. So that's on collegeunmazed.com/downloads. And I know, at MIFA, you guys have shared that a few times, and it's a great resource just to really provide that facts in comparison to those 6 keys of college fit. So yeah, please, collegeunmazed.com, really simple. Would love to hear from you guys for sure.
Yeah. And just to emphasize, it's free. The downloads, the College Data Organizer is free. And another free resource that we just launched is we actually updated the college knowledge quizzes a little bit. So it's no longer the cake, but we updated them and broke it up into 2 shorter quizzes. If you go to collegeunmazed.com/quiz, there's quizzes there to just assess what we call your basic college knowledge and then your decision making knowledge. So if you take the quiz, it emails you a score report that you can then share with a counselor or an advisor or whomever. So that's a free resource that we just recently launched in the past week or so, actually. So so give that a shot. It's free, and love to see students, families, and counselors use the materials. So.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Tim, Amanda, thank you very, very much. And hopefully you will come back and talk about those other items that are on my list.
Please, anytime. Happy to, for sure.
Yep. Thank you very much. Yeah.
All right, folks, that was our show today. I want to thank our guests, Dr. Timothy Poynton and Dr. Amanda Sterk. It was great having you on and hearing what you had to say. I learned a lot. And folks, if you liked what you heard today and you want to know more from us on planning, saving, and paying for college and career readiness, well then please follow our show, and you can do that wherever you find your podcasts. Please remember to review us as well, as it does help us to keep doing what we're doing and getting this show out to folks like you. Oh, and if you have anybody in your life, friends, family, that may also benefit from hearing the show and the things that we talk about, definitely let them know that we're around. I want to thank our producer, Sean Connolly. I'd like to thank AJ Yee, Lauren Dans, and Lisa Rooney for their assistance in getting the show posted so that you can hear it. And once again, my name is Jonathan Hughes, and this has been the MIFA Podcast. Thank you.